BURT Lancaster, the legendary masculine icon of classic Hollywood. But behind that glamorous facade, he carried a secret powerful enough to bring the entire film industry to its knees. A lifelong hero on screen, hailed as the ultimate model of the American man, yet BURT lived with a truth he never dared to speak out loud. He once loved men. Not just one, but at least 5 famous men passed through BURT Lancaster's life. One made him fall to his knees and beg. One betrayed him right before the Oscars. And one secretly recorded BURT's confession, using it as blackmail for nearly a decade. So who were those 5 men? And what did BURT Lancaster have to sacrifice to keep that secret buried until his death? Everything will be revealed in today's video. Born into a poor family in the harsh Harlem neighborhood in 1913, BURT Lancaster grew up surrounded by dust train noise and dreams crushed by life. But instead of surrendering, he left home to join the circus, where people had to live like soldiers, train like wild animals to survive. It was this extraordinary past that forged his muscular body, steely eyes, and irreplaceable temperament. And then fate called his name. His first leading role in The Killer's 1946 turned him into an overnight phenomenon. From the legendary kiss on the beach in From Here to Eternity, to the Oscar for Elmer Gantry, BURT continuously reached the pinnacle of glory. Over 1.85 m, tall with a face as beautiful as a sculpture, BURT was the definition of the ideal man on the American silver screen. But that was just a role. Behind all the glory, BURT Lancaster was a man who carried within him a part of the truth that he never dared to openly admit. A secret that could ruin a career if exposed at that time. A secret that Hollywood has always known, but no one dares to tell. 1. Cary Grant, first love, ends in bitter betrayal. They were 2 of the most charming men in Hollywood at the time. One was known as the most beautiful face in America. The other was the embodiment of strength and principle. But few people knew that BURT Lancaster and Cary Grant had a secret love affair, passionate, furtive, and ended in a betrayal that left BURT devastated for life. According to a butler who worked at Grant's mansion in Santa Monica, BURT often stayed overnight there between 1948 and 1951. They swam together at night in the private pool behind the house, drank bourbon under the moonlight, and even tattooed the same small symbol on their ankles. A secret bond that no one had ever known about. But Hollywood was not a place for such love affairs. In 1951, when Cary Grant began to be rumored to be dating the young actress Betsy Drake, who would later become his wife, BURT felt like he had been stabbed in the back. According to a person on the set of Jim Thorpe, all-American BURT smashed the telephone in the dressing room when he heard that Grant had publicly announced his love for Betsy in the press. Worse still, it was Cary who refused to act with BURT in a major project afterwards, for fear that being too intimate on screen would arouse suspicion. The pain was not just jealousy, but a feeling of utter rejection, as if their relationship had never existed. A handwritten letter never sent, found in BURT's house after his death, contained a hauntingly short line. "You choose to live a lie to the world, and I choose to die with the truth." The love affair with Cary Grant ended not with a goodbye, but with a silence that killed Burt day by day. But his heart, though broken, had not yet learned to refuse love. And then another man appeared, more handsome, more famous, and more dangerous. A man whose photo alone was enough to bury them both in the grave of fame. 2. Rock Hudson, Friendship or Love, and the Fateful Night in Rome. If Cary Grant was the first wound in life, then Rock Hudson was the relationship that sent Burt Lancaster into a dangerous spiral of love temptation and fear of destruction. Rock Hudson, 6'6", and flawlessly handsome, was the perfect definition of the American man of the 1950s. But behind that standard smile was a lonely soul who always had to hide himself. And Burt Lancaster, who had suffered the pain of being rejected by Cary Grant, seemed to see in Rock a reflection of himself. According to a story from a camera assistant on the set of The Leopard in 1963, where Burt and Rock were scheduled to film at the same time in Rome, the two famous men often disappeared from the main hotel and rented a separate penthouse on the outskirts of the city. There they lived like two strangers to the world. No cameras, no red carpets, no pretense. There were only private dinners, soft French music, and a bed that no third person had ever entered. One night, according to a never-before-published account from the chambermaid, Burt was found drunk crying on the floor with a torn-up letter beside him, and Rock had left without saying goodbye. A few days later, the Italian press reported that Hudson was holding hands with a local model, a publicity stunt to calm the rumors that were swirling around Europe. Burt never spoke of the incident in Rome again. But according to a close friend, that was the only time Burt lost his temper on set. He punched a mirror in the dressing room without saying a word. When asked, he simply said, "Don't love anyone who isn't brave enough to love you," in broad daylight. No one knew who Burt was talking about. But those who were near him that day knew it was Rock Hudson. If Burt Lancaster had passionate and emotional relationships, his relationship with J. Edgar Hoover was at the opposite extreme, cold and calculating. J. Edgar Hoover, the legendary FBI director and the most powerful man in America for nearly half a century. He could silence Hollywood, make the president wary, and hold secret files that could bring down anyone. No one expected Burt, a rebellious actor and free-spirited artist, to connect with Hoover, the symbol of discipline and control. But that was the beginning. Burt Lancaster met Hoover at a charity event in Washington, D.C., where the powerful and the showbiz often mingle. No one expected such a strange connection between a movie star and a security tycoon. Hoover was rumored to be gay all his life, but he never admitted it. Hoover was a man famous for keeping things under wraps. He was said to have had a decades-long intimate relationship with his close aide Clyde Tolson, but he never admitted that he was gay. For Burt, the connection with Hoover was not classic love, but an implicit sympathy between two men, one yearning for freedom, the other imprisoned by his power. They met several times over private dinners, on impromptu, off-the-record phone calls with meaningful glances between hundreds of people. No one knows exactly what they shared, but Burt once said he was the strongest man in America and the loneliest man I have ever met. The relationship with J. Edgar Hoover is a different chapter where emotion is stifled by power and self-denial. But after all that turmoil, BURT Lancaster fell in love again. A love that didn't last long but left a gentle echo throughout his life. And that person was Ricky Nelson. Ricky Nelson, the teenage star, was the young singer from the hit TV series The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. He has an innocent, pure face and always appearing in public with a gentle smile and eyes that seem to contain the whole sky of youth. They met in the early 60s when Ricky was just turning 20 and BURT was almost 50. A generation gap that seemed impossible to match. But it turned out that there was an invisible thread between them, the desire to understand, to touch, to trust. Ricky was trying to break free from the good boy image that the media had imposed on him. He wanted to grow up to be himself, but he didn't know which path to take. And BURT, who had been through it all, became his guide. He looked at me like I had all the answers. But the truth was, I was just trying not to let him get lost, like I did, Lancaster said in the unpublished letter. They didn't love each other as equals. BURT was a teacher, a protector, but also the first person to make Ricky feel loved for who he was. They were together for a few short months, living in the fragile peace of a secret relationship. BURT knew Ricky was too young. He still had his paths to walk. And he didn't want love to become something that would tie him down. So one day, he took the initiative to withdraw. Not because he didn't love him anymore, but because he loved him enough to know to stop. They didn't see much of each other after that, but every time Ricky appeared on television, singing about sad love, BURT would always turn on the TV alone in the dark room. After a series of quiet relationships, BURT Lancaster moves on to the burning love of his life. This is the climax chapter where love, lust are wrapped up in one name, Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando was unlike anyone BURT had ever met. He didn't try to be different. He was different. Wild, charming, and dangerous as an uncontrolled storm. Where BURT was a disciplined man who lived within limits, Brando was a rule breaker, not just in movies, but in love. BURT and Marlon met in the late 1950s at a private party for veteran producers and directors in Beverly Hills. Amid the tuxedos, champagne, and empty toasts, BURT's eyes fell on Brando, who stood alone. He didn't smile. He didn't pretend to blend in. He just quietly observed the world like a wild animal in an actor's skin. I didn't know if I was looking at a human being or an impending collision, but I knew from that moment on that I wouldn't be able to avoid him. BURT wrote in a small black notebook, hidden away for life. When BURT started talking, Brando smiled and said, "You are someone I used to hate because you acted too standard. But I like you because you never pretended to be someone else." That night they talked until 3 a.m., not about cinema, but about war, Freud, Sartre, existentialism, and even love as a political language. They were not attracted to each other physically, but intellectually, through the collision of ideas. And then after a long look in the car, Brando said only one sentence: "Do whatever you want, but I will not belong to you." BURT didn't answer. But inside his head, fire was burning. They began meeting secretly in beachside hotels and rented houses north of Santa Barbara where no one was watching. No one knew who the lead was. One night, Brando would show up at Burt's door at 2 a.m. just to lie down beside him without saying a word. There were weeks when they wouldn't see each other, and then they would suddenly move toward each other like two planets drawn together by gravity. Neither of them yielded. They argued like two directors, loved like two mad artists, and touched each other like two souls who refused to belong to either. Brando called Burt a rock that knows pain because he was tough on the outside, but full of pain on the inside. Burt called Brando a heartless flame because he burned fiercely, but always kept an untouchable void. They had nights where they argued until 3 a.m. Then the next morning, they drove back to Big Sioux Beach together. The egos were too big. The wounds were too deep. The secrets were too heavy. They both loved each other with the ugliest parts of themselves. And that was what made the relationship impossible. Brando began to change. There were days when he disappeared without a warning. There were weeks when he drowned himself in alcohol or acted as if he had never loved. He smiled at others when Burt was around. And when confronted, Brando would just shrug, "You know I am." And Burt, strong as he was, began to crumble from within. He can make me feel like I'm the only person in the universe, and then the next second, make me feel invisible. One night in April 1960, after a heated argument in Burt's Los Angeles apartment, Brando stormed out. They never lived together again, but they never really left each other's hearts. Years later, when they were both old, Brando sent Burt a postcard, no words, just a picture of an empty beach. And Burt understood. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't explaining. He was just reminding me of where we used to be. No one knows for sure who he loved most deeply. A part of his heart belonged to relationships that never made the news, but live on in Hollywood's most secret memories. Despite his life of deep secrets and hidden love affairs, Burt Lancaster still got married. He still lived a normal life in the public eye with his wife and children. But like everything else in his life, marriage was also a private world full of contradictions. His first marriage was to June Ernst, a woman who was no stranger to the spotlight, not the cinema, but the circus. It was at the circus where Burt worked as a young man that they met amid the dangerous tightrope training and the applause of the crowd. The two married young, bringing with them the bond of two people who shared hardships, living together in a world without a fixed stage. But the harsh life of the circus, the financial pressure, and the change in their ambitions caused the relationship to begin to crack. And then without noise, without scandal, they parted as quietly as they had come together. People still argue about the year of the divorce. 1940, 1946. No one remembers exactly. Perhaps because even Burt himself wanted to forget. Burt later met Norma Anderson during World War II when she was an office worker volunteering to perform for a sick USO troop serving American soldiers in Europe. That chance meeting sparked a lasting relationship that lasted more than 2 decades. They married in 1946 and had 5 children, Bill James, Susan Joanna, and Siegel, known as Sheila. Bill Lancaster later became the screenwriter of The Bad News Bears, and Joanna Lancaster became a producer. more than just a behind-the-scenes